Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Let's begin this morning with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrasts, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ. Amen. And so it is. All right. Our quotes. The first one. Patience is not about doing nothing. Patience is about constantly doing everything you can, but being patient about the results. Next, instead of focusing on those circumstances you cannot change, focus strongly and powerfully on those circumstances which you can. And that one was by Joy Page. Lastly, we only have 3 today. A clear vision backed by definite plans gives you a tremendous feeling of confidence and personal power. All right, so as I said, those are the only 3 we're having today, but I picked them very specifically because each of them highlights a very important concept we'll be focusing on today, and that is finding the balance in all things. Or said another way, rightly dividing all things, not just the scripture, but rightly dividing everything in your life, all incoming information from any source. Let's go through them now, those 3 quotes, and hopefully you'll see what I'm talking about. Quote number 1, patience is not about doing nothing. All right, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that's what patience is, just sitting around, doing nothing, waiting for something to happen or for a situation to change. Not so. Let's go to the next line. Patience is about constantly doing everything you can, but being patient about the results. Okay, so let's break this down a little. It says patience is about constantly doing everything you can. Let's stop right there. Doing everything you can implies there are things you cannot do. What are those things? Well, I would say in this context that you cannot do anything that would harm or hurt another. You can't or shouldn't do anything to manipulate another or to manipulate an outcome, because what do we know? What do we always talk about? The only person's behavior you have any control over is your own. You can't change anyone else. You may be able to force someone to bend to your will, to get them to do what you want them to do temporarily. But any change that comes through external force will not last because it is not built on the solid foundation of love. That's why we have in this world a history of revolutions. You can only force people to behave against their will and do things counter to their own best interest for so long. Eventually they will rise up and overthrow their oppressors. It happens every time. So the best thing you can do when you're in a situation that you desire for there to be some sort of change in is to learn how to pray the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Patience is constantly doing the things you can until things change. And guess what? If you do that and things don't change, the action of constantly and continually doing the things you can will change you. And maybe then you'll no longer even care if the circumstances or the person changes because you've changed. And that's the real goal anyway, to constantly be working on yourself. We'll talk a little more about that later. So that's the first quote. Patience is not just sitting around waiting. It is a balance between doing what you can and not worrying about all the things that are out of your control. and eventually a positive result will emerge from finding that balance. On to quote number 2. I'm just going to read this one because it's basically got the same explanation for it as quote number 1. It's just reiterating the same message. Instead of focusing on those circumstances you cannot change, focus strongly and powerfully on those which you can. I've talked before about the fact that sometimes we get stretched very thin emotionally and even physically because we try to do too many things, help too many people. We get sad about things that are far away from us and don't personally affect us. So my habit has become do what's right in front of you. If God puts someone or a situation directly in your path, then do what you can. Absolutely do it with all your heart. But if it's not right in front of you, it's not yours to worry about. Okay, we're going to talk a little later about circumstances in general. Quote number 3, a clear vision backed by definite plans gives you a tremendous feeling of confidence and personal power. You have to find the balance between just having and holding a vision and in creating a plan for how you're going to actually get it, okay? Get what you want. One is incomplete without the other. You can't just hold the vision for this thing you want. You can't just put it up on a vision board and then forget about anything else. There is action that goes along with it, a plan that you have to, again, like the first quote, you have to constantly do everything you can. That's the balance. All right, so my teaching today is called Unconditional Living versus Unconditional Loving. And it was inspired by a talk I heard from our friend Andrew Martin, whom I quote a lot. The name of his talk was Unconditional Living, which I'll read a few excerpts from in a moment. But first, I just want to say that I have learned an important lesson over and over again in the process of listening to all the talks and lectures that I listen to by various teachers. And that is this. I have not yet come across one that I agree with 100% of the time. But when I hear them say something I disagree with, I don't automatically discount everything else they say. I just observe what that's bringing up in me, and I use it as food for thought. If I feel that what they've said merits me changing my opinion, then I do. And if I don't, I don't. I bless them and let them go their way. That's what I meant when I said earlier that we're going to talk today about learning how to rightly divide. There's no human on the face of the earth you're always going to agree with about everything. And that's good, because if that were true, we'd all be robots and there'd be a whole lot more cults than there already are. So let's talk about, this talk by Andrew Martin about unconditional living, there are parts of it I agree with and parts that I think are coming from a place that I understand but not necessarily agree with. And I'll go through all of that as we go along. What's really interesting is on the same day that I listened to his talk, I also listened to another talk by a guy named Kyle Cease that kind of argued, it's not really an argument, but it showed the other side of the coin, as it were, to what Andrew was saying. And we'll get to that later on as well. The main point, though, is you must find the balance in everything. There's no single teacher, no single religion, no single spiritual practice, no single life philosophy that's going to work for you 100% of the time. At some point, you've got to learn how to follow your own inner guidance. But that's a process. I read a quote the other day that I love. It says, "I have been a seeker, and I still am. But I have stopped asking the books and the stars. I started listening to the teaching of my soul." That quote is by the poet Rumi. And I would add to that list, I have stopped asking pastors and spiritual teachers and gurus. There are a variety of systems and people and philosophies, such as astrology. He mentioned the stars here, and even people who can serve as guides for you. But at the end of the day, you've got to decide for yourself and follow your own inner guidance. But, as we'll also talk about today, that takes a certain level of maturity and a certain amount of experience. Children have parents for a reason. And just like a 5-year-old child can't be expected to make decisions with the wisdom of an adult, someone who is immature spiritually can't be expected to always make the best decision for themselves, which is why pastors and spiritual teachers and gurus still exist. But even then, as I said earlier, there's no one you should follow blindly 100% of the time. And the last thing I'll say before diving into the teaching is that just because I'm disagreeing more with one of these teachers and their teachings today and using the other as an example that's the opposite, please don't think I'm trying to say that one is right and the other is wrong. That's not the point. In fact, I have heard both of these guys in other settings say pretty much the opposite of what they're saying in the pieces I'll read from them today. It's all about the context and the fact that truth is often held, in fact, always, it is held in the tension between opposites. Two seemingly opposing ideas can both be true. You might just need to apply them differently in different situations. So let's start with a piece by Andrew Martin that he calls Unconditional Living. He begins by asking a series of questions, which I'll read to you now. Number one, who is in charge of your well-being? Who is responsible for your health and happiness? 2, when is it appropriate for you to choose the things that align with you and what you know to be true? Number 3, when is it appropriate to deny yourself the things that you desire and that you believe promote health and happiness in your life? And 4, do you require someone else's permission to be happy, healthy, balanced, and thriving? And then he goes into an explanation of why he thinks these are important questions for you to ask yourself. And it kind of gives you some background information about where he's coming from and the thought process that led to him giving this particular thought. He talks about a client of his that he's been counseling privately who has a situation going on in her life that's taking up a lot of her emotional energy. And she feels like she can't really be happy again until it's resolved. And he was trying to help her get to the bottom of why she feels this way. So he asks her, is this story you've been telling yourself really true? The story that A, B, and C have to be checked off on this emotional to-do list you've made for yourself before you can get back to enjoying your life. Is that really true? And then he went into a story about himself, that he had a day off recently where he had no clients to see and no other work to do. And what he really wanted to do was play video games all day. That's how he relaxes. But he went through what he describes as 4 hours of mental torture, arguing with himself about how he as an adult shouldn't be playing video games because he hadn't done anything productive first. He was reminding himself of all the projects he had started that he was in the middle of and hadn't finished and that he could be working on instead. And then he said he had a moment of clarity where he said to himself, and I'm quoting him now, I am a 50-year-old man. I owe nobody anything. No one is waiting on me for anything. There is literally no reason at all that I can't spend the bulk of the day playing video games, and yet here I am, all worked up, arguing with myself, tied up in knots about the simple fact that I just want to enjoy playing video games today. There was a voice inside my head telling me that I had to complete all of these other things before I could possibly even think about having fun or enjoying my day. So then he goes into where that voice came from in him about the video games and in his client thinking or feeling that her life really couldn't go on, happily at least, until a certain circumstance was resolved exactly the way she wanted it to be. And he asks himself why so many of us make our well-being, our happiness, our joy, our inner peace and relaxation conditional. And what he comes up with are some questions that he then asked his client as well as himself in order to get to the heart of where this voice inside both of them is coming from. The first question is, as a child, were you told that you had to eat your vegetables before you got your dessert? Next was, were you perhaps told that you had to take out the trash before you could do something fun, or that you had to complete a list of chores before you could relax and enjoy yourself? Then he continues, certainly it is important for a child to understand responsibility, and you must teach him that. And it's also important to instill in a child the idea that sometimes in life we've got to do some things we don't necessarily want to do. But when did we decide culturally that well-being has to come at a price? When did we decide that all pleasure, fun, joy, etc. needed to cost us something? When did we decide that it needed to be a transactional experience? So I'm listening to this and I'm with him so far. Yes, I believe we should prioritize and that we are responsible for our own health and well-being. And no, we shouldn't always view getting to do something we want to do only as a reward for doing something we don't enjoy doing. But then the next part he goes into gets a little murky for me, and I'll tell you why. First, let me share with you what he said. He says, "What message does this send to a child?" I think what it tells the kid is that well-being and feeling good is an indulgence, and that struggle, suffering, and doing things we don't want to do will always have to be a priority over our well-being. I also think it teaches children how to reject their own inner knowing. The child's inner knowing says, hey, it's time to play, or hey, it's time to nap. But the parent comes along and says, no, you can't do that until you do A, B, and C. But the child is saying, but that's not what I'm feeling inside. This is what my heart, my soul, and my spirit is telling me to do. And the parent says, no, that's wrong. I don't care what you feel. I don't care what your soul is telling you. You need to take out the trash. These moments might seem insignificant, but if a child is raised in this atmosphere for 18 years that their joy, happiness, well-being, etc. has to come at a price, then they'll believe it's a luxury that comes only after doing something they hate. End quote. So then he goes on to talk about the fact that suffering and hardship is indeed an effective way that we learn lessons, but that lessons can also, or just as easily, be learned through allowing and compassion and understanding. To which I would say I agree that lessons can also be learned through those things, but not necessarily as easily. And I don't know why that's the case, and I wish it weren't. But I have lived long enough to know that lessons that hurt a little just seem to make a deeper impression on you and last longer than the things that come to you easily. I didn't make the rules. And don't get me wrong, I am all about finding ease and allowing things to come to you and not being addicted to the struggle mentality. I've even taught about that before. But I disagree with him a little here when he says that those things don't come with a price tag, because they do. The price, though, isn't necessarily suffering, which is the way he has couched it here. The price is maturity. You only find the ease and lose the struggle when you have reached a certain level of maturity. The way he explained it is so severe and so black and white. He makes what I would consider normal and responsible parenting sound like some kind of cruel and unusual punishment. Now, let me back up a bit and say he might feel this way because of the way he was parented. I don't know. I listen to him a lot, and I don't hear him speak a lot about his parents. So I have no idea what filter he's looking through when he views parenting in general. Another factor is he himself is not a parent. I do know that because I've heard him say that. So when he makes statements implying parents should never discourage children from doing what their soul wants to do, is telling them to do, I can assure you that that statement is not being made by a man who has ever stood in his kitchen and had his 12-year-old son burst through the door screaming in pain because he thought it would be a good idea and his soul was telling him, and he wanted to drop his pants and sit on top of an ant pile purposely because he and his buddies had just watched an episode of Jackass and they were daring each other to do that. I have had that experience. So the lens I look at parenting through is a little bit different than his. That's a lesson my son learned through suffering, and one he never forgot. I didn't impose the suffering on him. He brought it on himself through his immaturity. That's what I was saying a minute ago. Sometimes the price we pay and the reason we suffer is simply the product of our immaturity. And kids, by definition, are immature. If you always let your child do exactly what they wanted to do and follow the impulses of their little immature souls, they'd never do their homework or brush their teeth or clean their room or take a shower. So there's a line. I don't personally think it's cruel or damaging to teach your kids that there are certain things that are necessary for them to do that are good for them, whether they enjoy them or not. And yes, those things must be done before they get to do things that they want to do because they are more important. That has nothing to do with the true meaning of unconditional living, which is what he's connecting it to, or with not prioritizing your well-being, and it doesn't cause them to deny themselves when they become adults. And basically, it's just life in the big city, as my cousin Dana used to say. It's a parent's job to teach and to train and to guide. Now, that all can be taken too far, and some parents are indeed abusive, both physically and psychologically. But the idea that telling your child he has to eat his vegetables before he can have dessert is a far cry from abuse, which is one of the examples he gives here of why we as adults learn not to prioritize our well-being, which is not really something I agree with. I get the general point he's trying to make, that we shouldn't make our happiness dependent on certain conditions, especially ones that others, i.e. parents, when we're children, set for us. I just think, as I said, the lens he's looking through might be causing him to have an incomplete picture of things, because while struggle isn't always necessary for growth, it is sometimes. Let's not say struggle, discomfort. That's a better word. And this idea that you don't ever have to do anything you don't want to is just unrealistic. That's not what unconditional living means to me. Following your heart and your own inner guidance is wonderful. It's the ultimate goal. But it's only productive when it's coupled with maturity and the ability to self-govern. We've talked about this before. If you don't learn to properly govern yourself, then someone else will govern you for you. Okay. And it's a parent's job to teach their children how to self-govern. Now, again, some parents take it too far, and they micromanage every little decision their child makes up until the day they leave home. And that's not healthy either. Optimally, kids need to be given more and more freedom and the ability to decide more and more things for themselves little by little as they grow and mature and prove they can be responsible with those decisions. And some kids just naturally mature faster than others. That's why you have to have a personal, individual relationship with each of your kids. But at some point, they will learn that certain actions have certain consequences. And it's much easier to learn that under the loving guidance of a parent than after they're already out in the world on their own without a safety net. So, this picture that Andrew Martin is painting of what he calls unconditional living, which is basically not settling for anything other than exactly what you want, when you want it, and not letting others set the conditions for your happiness, while it's possible, it also requires a certain level of maturity and self-governance. And I'm not sure he makes that completely clear in this talk. If you go back to his opening set of questions, one of them is, do you require someone else's permission to be happy, healthy, balanced, and thriving? And I would say I get what he's saying here, that those things are ultimately your own responsibility, but it's not so much about needing the permission of others as needing their support. No man is an island. We're all connected and interconnected, and therefore we have to live in relationship with one another. And when you have relationship on any level, even if it's just your neighbor or a person that lives in your same state, there's a certain degree of implied compromise in order to get along and for life to run smoothly. So it's not always about doing exactly what you want when you want, not feeling the need to meet the conditions of others. Consideration for others is not the same as settling for less. That's part of the scarcity mentality, that in order for me to give them what they want, I have to deny myself of something I want. That's what that mentality leads to. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. Compromise doesn't always mean losing, which is one of the ways this concept of unconditional living can be misunderstood if it's not being viewed through the lens of a mature person who has learned to self-govern. So, that's why I disagree with him a bit about the cause of adults not prioritizing their well-being being the result of their parents simply teaching them how to self-govern. A child shouldn't follow his own inner guidance until he's reached a certain level of maturity, because, as I pointed out, that can lead to missing 3 days of school, lying face down on the couch, waiting for the 100+ ant bites on your behind to heal, like my son did. So, similarly, until you are spiritually mature, you shouldn't try to live unconditionally like he's describing, because that usually turns into some version of treating people any way you want to treat them in the name of living your own truth, or neglecting your responsibilities to others in the name of not letting your boundaries be crossed. So, moving on, as I said earlier, the missing piece, I believe, in Andrew's picture of unconditional living is maturity. And maturity requires growing, which sometimes involves pain and discomfort. Let's go a little deeper into this by reading a piece by Kyle Cease now called The Power of the Gray. Remember what I said about Andrew's depiction of the parent-child interaction being very black and white? That's looking at parenthood through the lens of immaturity. Maturity requires some understanding of the gray areas, or as my brother talked about on Sunday, being at peace with not knowing, which is exactly what Kyle Cease talks about in this piece. He says, be excited about the power of the gray area. When trying to figure out what your highest is, what you might not understand is that your highest might not have anything to do with which way you go, but rather about your acceptance of the gray area. A lot of spiritual teachers teach that when asking yourself or when trying to decide whether or not something is resonating with you, you don't do it or you shouldn't choose it unless it's a 10. Of course, referring to that scale we often use, 1 to 10, as a measurement for how much we like something or how much we're satisfied with something. Unfortunately, how many people have come to understand this is that anything that is not a 10 must be or should be completely discarded. For instance, if you go out on a date with someone and it wasn't a 10 experience, but it also wasn't a 1, it wasn't terrible, but no sparks flew immediately, it was between a 4 and a 6, pretty much in the middle. Some people's understanding of this concept is that if the first date wasn't a 10, then that person's not the one for you, and not only should you not accept a second date, but you feel the need to block them on social media and delete their number from your phone. There's no thought process of, well, wait a minute, maybe there's no romantic spark, but perhaps there could be a good solid friendship here, or maybe they just had an off night, or I should give it a bit more time, or be with them in a different setting. Some people have misunderstood the concept of resonance as an all or nothing proposition, and that is not productive. A lot of times when we're doing the 1 to 10 scale following our heart thing, we end up getting too obsessed with measuring the circumstance rather than our ability to stay centered in our heart within the circumstance. Sometimes our ability to be okay with being in the gray area is the thing we should actually be measuring. It's not about a particular circumstance and whether it is a 1 or a 5 or a 10, but it's about you getting okay or remaining centered no matter what number the circumstance is. We get so caught up in the black and white of things, but it's in the gray areas that things come up for us that we really need to look at and address. Sometimes your 10 is just to sit within the feeling of I don't know. How cool is that he said that? That's what we're all about here. Sometimes Source will present you with a crossroads situation in life where you literally don't know which direction to take, just to force you to go within and be present in the moment and learn how to be more comfortable with uncertainty. All right, so I want to stop right here before I share the next thing he says with you and do a little comparison. When you're looking at this concept that Andrew Martin was talking about, unconditional living, through an immature lens, it gets misunderstood as being this place where you never have to compromise and you always get to do exactly what you want, no matter how it affects others, because you are the only one who gets to set the conditions for your own happiness and should never put anything above your quest for happiness or expect to have to give anything in exchange for it. That's not what it is. but that's what it can seem to be when misunderstood due to spiritual immaturity, which is what Kyle is saying here as well. This is what he says next. You are living in the black and white when you say, I've got to nail this. I've got to get this perfect or I can't have anything. It's all or nothing. That's not how the universe works. There's so much pressure in that view of unconditional living. When you concentrate instead on unconditional loving yourself and everyone else, no matter what the circumstance is, then you're growing and maturing. All right, let's talk about growing for a minute. When you're a child and you're physically growing, your body's actually getting bigger, you're getting taller, you're gaining weight, there comes a time when your clothes get uncomfortable because they're now too tight. Your feet hurt when you wear shoes that are too small. But that discomfort is just a signal that you need some new clothes. You need some new shoes that are bigger. And you might never get those new clothes and shoes if the old ones didn't get uncomfortable. So next he goes into this idea that we're here on earth to learn love. And so life sometimes has to put things in our path to help us do this, which can be uncomfortable. He says, what you don't learn to love will have to come up over and over again until you change your approach. Whatever you don't want must come up over and over again because you can't get rid of it with hate or resistance. So when you say, for instance, I don't like anxiety, that's why it keeps coming up. Because by not loving and accepting it, you are saying, I am going to deal with this through my ego. I'm not going to merge with God and embrace everything as it is. My ego self, which is the equivalent of a 5-year-old child, is going to attempt to fix my anxiety. A better way to deal with it is to take a deep breath and thank it for showing you that you've been living on a frequency that no longer serves you. That's all anxiety is. If you are refusing to grow, life has to make itself crazy enough on the level you've decided to stay on that you choose to move to the next level. So what's that quote we always say? Change will happen when the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of changing. He goes on, so what is it in your life that you're not accepting? Again, let's go back and compare. The idea of unconditional living seen through an immature lens says, I'm not going to change or grow because that involves pain and discomfort, and I don't want to experience that. I don't have to eat my vegetables. I just want to go straight to the dessert. Okay, well then you get a stomach ache or your teeth rot out. I don't want to take out the trash. I just want to play video games. Okay, so then you get bugs all over your house and it stinks because you just got piles of trash in there. Sometimes growth involves a little discomfort. Just take a deep breath and welcome the discomfort, unconditionally love it and accept it. That's the only way to move through it. Okay, you don't grow and expand if circumstances are always good and comfortable. Why would you? Discomfort is what pushes us out of our comfort zone, and we have to leave our comfort zone in order to get to a bigger place. If you choose to stay attached to a lower level or version of you, things have got to get worse and worse in order to show you that you're still living an old story. If you're experiencing fear and anxiety, all it means is that you're still living in a world that's smaller than what you are. Or in other words, you're still trying to put on those clothes and shoes that you've outgrown. It's uncomfortable. They're too tight now. All right. So here's where the split happens between these two concepts of unconditional living and unconditional loving. Being the captain of your own boat, the decider of your own fate, the creator of your own reality is a great concept. It's one that I believe in. I teach about it all the time, and it is certainly better than letting others control you or playing the victim and believing that life is just happening to you. But unless you've got the spiritual maturity to go along with it, that's all just coming from your ego self. You've got to come up a little higher, okay? And accept your connection with the divine and realize that that's the source of your power to do all these things in order for it to be genuine. Let's go back to Kyle. He says, the idea that you egoically think is you cannot control your destiny. Something bigger than what you think is you, but actually is you, is trying to take over and give you your destiny. It's saying, if you would just get out of the way of what's happening and listen to the pain inside, I will take over for you. Now, big time out. I know this probably sounds like it's contradicting some things I've taught before, that we can't or we shouldn't rely on Jesus or pastor or mama and daddy to do things for us that we are capable of doing for ourselves, that we shouldn't say things like, God's going to fight our battles for us. This is a higher level. This is not that. And as I said earlier, you have to have some level of maturity to discern the difference. This is moving into that stage we talk about of letting God move through you, not just around you and in you, but through you and as you. But in order for that to happen, the you that needs to get out of the way that he's talking about here is your ego self, is that immature version of you that misunderstands what living unconditionally means, because you haven't yet added the most important piece, which is loving your life, yourself, and your circumstances unconditionally. One more time back to Kyle. He says, it was an old consciousness that taught us, change your thinking and you change your life. That was, at one time, awesome. What I'm offering you now is even higher, because what it has for you is better than anything you, in your egoic state, could ever come up with. Life is putting you in a place of intense surrender so God can delete the old patterns that needed to be understood at one point, but now no longer serve you. So, are you seeing a difference here? This idea of living unconditionally can have a little bit of defensiveness and selfishness to it, like, you're not the boss of me. I decide my own fate. Which is better, as I said, than letting others decide it for you. But there's a much higher level to live on, and it's so much more rewarding. A man named Joe Vitale, who wrote a book called Zero Limits that I've actually done a teaching on before, describes it like this. He says, I've learned that it's possible to reach a place inside ourselves where there are zero limits. This place of zero limits is the divine within you. There are 3 stages of life, beginning with stage 1 of you as a victim of your life. The second stage as you as the creator of your life. Okay, so this is what I would say is that level that Andrew Martin is talking about of unconditional living. But the third stage is you as servant to the divine in your life, or unconditional loving of every situation, even the painful, uncomfortable ones. In this last stage is where miracles occur. This is also known as the zero state, where nothing exists, but where everything is possible. Wow. That sounds good to me, like a level I want to be living on. An immature child is never going to want to do what's best for his own growth if it means he has to feel discomfort. A spiritually immature soul won't want to do that either. But in order to move up to that next level of power and possibility where there are no limits and miracles occur, that is exactly what it is going to require. Amen. So my brother has walked in the middle of this. He's in the house. You want to come say something? All right. Come on up here.
You know you're getting old when you get up and you do one of these things. I got up and let me see if I can stand up. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm here at the church today, and I am done with school. I am back in the country, and so I wanted to sneak in on the connection service today. What a mature teaching. Amen. Did you guys feel the balance in that? Yeah, we are the captains of our own ship. We are the creators of our own reality. However, if we sit on an anthill, you're going to get bit up. That money going to be spent up. It's going to be gone. And so, yeah, so that is the beauty. I heard somebody say, I don't remember the person who said it, but the quote was something like this. heaven and hell are very real, and they're both right now. We can create heaven for ourselves and others around us, or we can create hell for ourselves in this now present moment. And so tapping into that divine creativity, we don't really even use words like sin anymore. We don't think we're not offending God that much with our choices. But what we are doing is possibly offending our own spirit, our own sense of divinity, that we choose to want to experience a prosperous, abundant, happy, joyful, peaceful life. And those things don't happen by chance. They happen by choice. And so what a great teaching. I also love this, and some of you may have tapped into this, when LaDonna was saying, just because I listen to one teacher doesn't mean I agree with everything that teacher says. Isn't that how we approach the Bible? We rightly divide the word of truth. We don't throw the teacher away. We don't throw the whole Bible away. We say, hey, I agree with a lot of this, but maybe this is not for me right here. I'm mature enough to eat what's good for me and to maybe leave off what's not right for me in this season. And so we're grateful for a powerful teaching, for a mature word, for balance. Balance is not sexy. It's not fantastic. It's not fabulous. Nobody's going to fill up the Mercedes-Benz Stadium with talking about balance, but it is necessary in our lives. All those who live in extremes, all those who are on fire for God get burnt out real quickly. And so the balance is necessary in our lives. We hope you have a great week. Happy Tuesday to everybody. Looking forward to connecting with you tomorrow night. And then on Sunday morning, go in peace. May God bless you.